In the hushed, sterile glow of the NICU, I lived in a constant state of fear and hope. My newborn son was fragile, every beep, every movement of the machines felt like a lifeline I couldn't afford to lose. But one afternoon, as I walked in, something was wrong. His monitors were silent. The tube that fed him oxygen was disconnected. And no one seemed to notice. When I asked the nurse what happened, her hands trembled. My voice rose, my heart pounded, but it wasn't until I pulled out my phone and hit record that the room shifted. Suddenly, the calm professionalism cracked into something else entirely. The doctor froze mid-sentence. The nurse backed away. And I realized, in that moment, I had stepped into a place where mistakes were buried, and parents like me were expected to stay quiet. What happened next would not only test my strength as a mother, but would unravel a series of truths the hospital never intended me to see. Still remember the sound, or rather, the absence of it. The NICU had its own rhythm. The steady beeps, the low hum of machines, the muffled footsteps of nurses moving quickly but calmly. That rhythm became my comfort, my reassurance that my son was still here, still fighting. But that day, as I pushed open the glass door to his room, the rhythm was broken. The monitors were dead silent. At first, I thought maybe they had moved maybe he was in another section for a test. But then I saw him, tiny, still, his chest rising and falling far too slowly. His oxygen tube lay limp across the side of the incubator, disconnected. My body froze for half a second, my brain trying to catch up with my eyes. I glanced at the nurse sitting at the station outside, her head bent over a clipboard, as if nothing was wrong. Why is his oxygen off? My voice was sharp, louder than I intended. She looked up, startled, then quickly walked in. She fiddled with the tube, avoiding my gaze. He's fine, she muttered. We were just what? My voice cut in again. Something inside me was clawing its way out, a mix of fear and rage I had never felt before. She stammered, her hands shaking, and that's when I felt my phone in my pocket. I pulled it out, unlocked it, and hit record. The effect was immediate. She froze, her mouth half open. The doctor, who had just stepped in, stopped mid-sentence when he saw the phone. No one moved for a moment, and I realized I had walked into something much bigger than a simple mistake. Their faces told me that whatever happened here wasn't supposed to be seen. I want to know why my son's oxygen was off, I said slowly, making sure the camera caught every word. The doctor's eyes flickered to the nurse, then back to me. It was just a brief adjustment, he said, his voice too measured, too careful, but the look in his eyes was not careful, it was panicked. I'd been here long enough to know what real medical concern looked like, and this wasn't it. This was the look of someone calculating what to say so it couldn't be used against them. My son's small chest rose again, still too slow, and my heart slammed against my ribs. I wanted to rip the whole machine apart and put it back together myself, but I also knew that if I did, they'd say I interfered. So I stood there, holding my phone steady, my voice shaking but my hands still. In that moment, the NICU didn't feel like a place of healing anymore. It felt like a stage where mistakes were rewritten into explanations, where fear was covered by polite smiles, and where parents like me were supposed to believe whatever we were told, but I had the truth on camera now. And I had no idea just how dangerous that truth would become that night. When I went home to shower and change clothes, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Calls from unknown numbers. A voicemail from the hospital's patient liaison asking me to come in for a discussion. They said it was urgent. I pressed play on the recording again, listening to the moment the oxygen was off and the room went silent. My hands shook as I realized something chilling. I didn't just have evidence of negligence. I had evidence of something they might want buried, and then, as I stared at my phone, the screen flickered, and the video file suddenly vanished. I sat there, staring at the blank screen, my thumb frozen in mid-air. One moment the video was there, my son, the silent monitors, the nurse's trembling hands, and the next, it was gone. Not moved, not accidentally deleted. Gone. As if it had never existed. My first thought was panic, my second was anger. And my third was a realization that made my stomach twist: someone had accessed my phone. I had locked it when I left the NICU. I knew I had. I replayed the afternoon in my head, step by step, trying to find the gap where someone could have touched it. The only moment I'd left it unattended was when a nurse offered to help me carry my things as I packed up my bag. She'd smiled, the kind of smile that feels polite on the surface but carries something else underneath. I told myself I was imagining it. Paranoia. Exhaustion. But then I remembered the calls. The urgent message from the patient liaison. The way the doctor's eyes had darted between my phone and my face, I didn't call them back. Instead, I drove to the hospital earlier than usual the next morning, slipping into the NICU before the shift change. My son was sleeping, his little fist clenched near his chin. The monitors hummed, alive again, as if nothing had ever happened, but there was a new nurse on duty, one I'd never seen before. Her badge didn't match the format of the others, and she avoided looking directly at me. Every time I glanced her way, she seemed to be taking mental notes. When I asked about the oxygen incident, she tilted her head and said, "What incident?" Not confusion. Not curiosity. Just a flat dismissal, like the words themselves were. Dangerous. That's when I started recording again, only this time I didn't announce it. I kept my phone low, my voice calm, asking her to explain hospital policy about oxygen disconnections. She shifted in her chair, eyes flickering toward the security camera in the corner, and then she stood up and walked away. By noon, the liaison found me. A man in a navy suit, too polished to belong in the NICU. He smiled like he was greeting an old friend and said, "We're concerned about your mental state. These things can be overwhelming for parents." I almost laughed. Overwhelming? My son nearly lost his oxygen supply, and now my proof had disappeared. I told him I wanted the footage from the hospital's cameras. His smile didn't fade, but his tone hardened. "Our cameras in patient care areas are for internal safety review only." When I pressed him, he stepped closer and lowered his voice. "It's best not to start making accusations you can't support." That was the moment I knew they had something to hide, and they were willing to make me the problem to protect themselves. Went home that night with a decision: I wasn't going to rely on just my phone anymore. I dug out an old laptop, connected it to a tiny camera I used to use for home security, and planned to hide it in my son's room the next day. But when I arrived at the hospital the next morning, the security desk stopped me. They said my visiting privileges had been temporarily suspended for disruptive behavior. And that's when the real nightmare began, because my son was still inside, and I had no way to get to him. Stood at the hospital's front desk, my palms pressed flat against the cold counter, my voice low but shaking. "You're telling me I can't see my own child?" The security guard avoided my eyes, repeating the line like it was rehearsed: "Visitation privileges have been suspended pending review." "Pending review of what?" I demanded. The guard glanced over my shoulder, and I felt the weight of someone's gaze. Turning, I saw the man in the navy suit, the patient liaison, standing a few feet away, hands folded in front of him like he was overseeing a performance. "We're concerned for the well-being of both your child and our staff," he said, his tone perfectly even. "It would be best if you took a few days to rest." Rest. My son was in there without me, hooked up to machines I no longer trusted, cared for by people who had already failed him. And now they wanted me to walk away quietly. I refused to move. "If you don't let me in, I'll call the police." His smile didn't waver. "Go ahead. But understand, this is a private medical facility. Law enforcement can't override hospital administration without a court order." It hit me then: they had built a fortress of policy and procedure around themselves, and I was outside, pounding on the walls with nothing but my voice. Stepped outside to call a lawyer, but every number I dialed went to voicemail. By the time I reached someone willing to talk, they told me that without concrete proof, something more than my word, it would be my credibility against the hospitals. And the hospital would win that night. I sat in my car across the street from the hospital, watching the NICU windows glow in the dark. Every shadow that passed made me wonder if it was someone adjusting my son's machines, someone who might forget, again, to give him oxygen. I thought about the tiny camera I'd planned to hide. I still had it in my bag. But now I couldn't even get near him. The next day, I tried a different approach. I walked in with my phone off, no bag, no confrontation, just a mother wanting to see her child. The receptionist typed something into her computer, then looked up at me with an expression I couldn't read. It says here, you've been cleared to visit. But only under supervision. Supervision. Like I was a threat. When they led me into the NICU, the man in the suit was waiting by my son's bed. My baby was awake, his small fingers curling and uncurling, his chest rising more evenly now. I wanted to scoop him up, but the liaison stepped closer. You see? He's fine, he said softly, almost like a warning. I looked at the machines, at the oxygen line connected to him, at the nurse hovering in the background. My son's eyes met mine for a moment, and I felt the sting of tears. Then I noticed something, a faint red mark around his nostrils, as if the oxygen cannula had been off for longer than it should have been. I didn't say a word. Instead, I leaned in, kissed my son's forehead, and whispered, I'm not leaving you here. When I left that day, I didn't go home. I drove to a nearby motel, paid in cash, and set up my laptop. If they thought they had silenced me, they were wrong. I wasn't going to break into their system, I was going to watch them. And I knew exactly where to start. The hospital's unsecured public Wi-Fi IT was reckless. Dangerous. Possibly illegal. But I had one goal, to see what they didn't want me to see, and within hours, I found something that made my hands go cold, a document buried in a shared network folder, titled Incident Report, Oxygen Supply Interruption. The file was dated the exact day I'd walked into the NICU and found my son without oxygen. I opened it, my pulse thundering in my ears. It wasn't long, just 3 short paragraphs. But the language was cold, clinical, and calculated. It read, at 14:12, oxygen delivery to patient B, Carter, infant, was interrupted for approximately 47 seconds during routine equipment adjustment. Patient exhibited no acute distress. No further action required. Incident logged for internal review. 47 seconds. I replayed the scene in my mind, his slow chest movements, the silence of the monitors, the nurse fumbling with the tube. 47 seconds could be life or death for a baby his size. But what struck me even more was the phrasing, no acute distress. It was a lie. I saw the change in his breathing. I saw the nurse's panic, and then my stomach dropped. My name was nowhere in the report. Not a single mention of a parent being present. In their version, I didn't exist. I saved the file to my laptop, then to a flash drive, then emailed it to myself using a new, encrypted account. If they had been able to erase a video from my phone, I wasn't going to give them another chance, but as I dug deeper, I realized the report wasn't alone. There were dozens of other files, each with sterile descriptions of brief interruptions, temporary disconnects, and inconsequential anomalies. Some were for infants who weren't there anymore. One file stopped me cold. Patient K, Alvarez, oxygen interruption, 2 minutes 14 seconds, cardiac event followed, parents informed of unexpected complications. The date was 2 months before my son was born. The baby had died the next day. I sat back in my chair, bile rising in my throat. This wasn't an isolated mistake. This was a pattern. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept rereading the files, each one tightening the knot in my chest. I thought about the parents who never knew the truth, who walked out of that hospital believing what they were told. I thought about how close I had come to being one of them. By morning, I had made my choice. I wasn't going to the police, not yet. I needed undeniable proof, something they couldn't explain away or delete. And to get it, I had to get back inside the NICU without their supervision, spent the day watching the hospital from across the street, noting when staff left for breaks, when visitors came and went, when security seemed distracted. By evening, I had a plan. I knew which side door the cleaning staff used, and I knew it didn't always close properly. At midnight, dressed in dark clothes and carrying only my phone and the hidden camera, I slipped through that side door. The halls were eerily quiet. The kind of quiet that makes every footstep sound like an alarm. My heart pounded as I moved toward the NICU, every shadow making me flinch. When I reached my son's room, I froze. He was there, sleeping, but there was someone else, the new nurse, the one with the wrong badge. She wasn't adjusting his equipment. She was pulling out a small vial from her pocket and injecting something into his foreline. I lifted my phone, hit record, and prayed she didn't turn around, held my breath so hard my chest ached, my phone angled just enough to capture the nurse's hands. She moved quickly, almost mechanically, slipping the vial back into her pocket before glancing at the door. I stayed perfectly still in the shadows, my heart beating so loudly I was sure she could hear it. When she stepped away from my son's bed, I moved in, careful not to make a sound. My eyes went straight to the foreline. Whatever she had injected was gone now, already moving into his tiny veins. My first instinct was to rip the line out, but I didn't know if it was medicine he needed or poison meant to harm him. I looked at his face, still peaceful, but too still. His breathing was slower than usual. I reached for the monitor, pretending to adjust it, and the nurse's head snapped back around. "What are you doing here?" she hissed. Her voice was sharp, stripped of the polite tone she'd used before. I didn't answer. I just kept the phone recording, raising it slightly so her face was in full view. Her eyes darted to it, and for the briefest moment, I saw fear. Real fear. Then she turned and bolted from the room. I leaned over my son, whispering to him, telling him to hang on. My fingers trembled as I checked the monitor. His oxygen saturation was dropping. I slammed my hand against the call button. Seconds later, alarms blared through the NICU, the doors burst open, and the man in the navy suit was the first to appear, followed by two nurses who moved in with deliberate urgency. They didn't look surprised. They looked ready. One nurse repositioned the oxygen cannula, another adjusted the four. Within a minute, the numbers on the monitor began to climb again. My son's tiny chest rose a little faster. Relief washed over me, and then the anger hit. What did she inject into my son? I demanded, my phone still recording. The liaison didn't look at me. He just ordered the nurses to stabilize the patient and told me to step outside. "I'm not leaving him," I said, planting myself by the bed. The liaison finally turned to me, his expression flat. "If you want your child to remain here, you'll follow protocol." That was the moment I realized their power wasn't just in their control of the machines or the rules, it was in the way they made parents feel trapped. If I fought too hard, they could label me unfit, have my son transferred, maybe even take him out of my custody. But now I had something they couldn't erase, a clear recording of a nurse injecting something into my son without explanation, followed by his vitals dropping. I left the hospital that night with the video saved in 3 different places, sent to a lawyer, and uploaded to a cloud account they couldn't touch. I didn't sleep. I didn't cry. I just waited. The next morning, I posted the clip online with no caption, no commentary, just the raw footage. Within hours, it exploded. People demanded answers. Former patients began sharing their own stories. The hospital issued a statement about misinformation, but the comments section tore them apart. By nightfall, a news crew was calling me. Lawyers were reaching out, not to ask for payment, but to offer help. The hospital's polished walls and polished lies were cracking, and for the first time since my son was born, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel until then, hope, because this time, they weren't the ones controlling the story. I was.